abandoned bride was sent to the vampire's castle to die, but he waited a century just for her. Rain fell in cold sheets, soaking the heavy fabric of her gown and plastering her dark hair to her face. The villagers had whispered about this night for weeks, a night she had not chosen. Her family, driven by greed and fear, had sent her into the forest to die, believing that abandoning her would erase the prophecy that had haunted their house for generations. Alara shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Every shadow seemed alive, the wind carrying voices she could not understand. The moon struggled through thick clouds, casting fleeting beams of silver on the twisted trees. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her fine slippers useless in the mud. Panic gripped her chest. She had heard the stories of the vampire lord, Kale, whose castle rose like a black crown in the deepest part of the forest. No one who entered ever returned. Yet as her strength failed, a faint glow appeared through the mist, a structure taller than any tower she had ever seen. The castle's walls were black as midnight, and yet they shimmered with a strange inner light, like the stones themselves held secrets. Drawn by a force she could not name, Alara approached, her fear mingling with curiosity. The massive doors opened silently, as if inviting her inside. She crossed the threshold, and the smell of old stone and faint iron filled her nose. The hall stretched before her, tall arches disappearing into shadow. A chill touched her skin, and she realized she was no longer alone. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall and graceful, his presence commanding yet calm. Kale's eyes glowed faintly in the gloom, a light both terrifying and strangely comforting. His hair was black as night, his clothes dark and elegant, and his gaze lingered on her as if he had waited 100 years for this moment. "You should not be here," he said, his voice smooth like silk and sharp like steel. "No mortal survives these halls without purpose." I was abandoned," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. "My family, they left me in the forest to die." Kale studied her, his expression unreadable. He did not move closer, but she felt the weight of his presence press against her, heavy and inescapable. "Then perhaps fate has brought you to me instead." She flinched at the words. Fate. She did not believe in such things. And yet, something in his voice made her heart stir with both fear and awe. The castle was alive with strange beauty. Tapestries hung from the walls, depicting battles and celebrations long past. Candles flickered along the hallways, though no servants appeared to light them. Alara noticed mirrors that reflected not only her image but fleeting shadows of things she could not name. Her fear did not lessen, if anything it grew, for she understood that this place was not meant for mortals. Kale led her to a chamber, vast and dimly lit. A fireplace crackled with cold fire, the flames casting strange colors on the stone walls. A tall window looked out onto a forest that seemed endless, mist curling around the branches like ghostly fingers. He motioned for her to sit, and she obeyed, unsure why she trusted him. "You are the first bride I was promised," Kale said, his tone almost wistful. 100 years ago, a family feared the prophecy that tied me to a mortal woman. The bond was never fulfilled, and I have waited, always waiting for her return. Alara's heart twisted at the words. She did not fully understand what he meant, yet she felt the weight of history pressing down on her. A century of waiting for someone she barely knew. She was meant to be a bride, but not to any mortal man. This being was something beyond her comprehension, something dark and eternal. Why me?" she asked softly. "Because you have survived what no one else could," he said. His eyes softened for a brief moment, revealing a vulnerability hidden beneath centuries of isolation. "Because the curse that binds me and the one that haunts you are linked, and because, in some way, you belong to me." Alara's fear gave way to confusion. Belong to him. She had never wished to belong to anyone. And yet, the loneliness in Kale's eyes mirrored a loneliness she had never known she shared. His centuries of waiting had hardened him, but now she saw something fragile, almost human, beneath the immortal exterior. She spent the night in the chamber, the moonlight spilling across the floor. Sleep came fitfully, troubled by dreams she could not name. Shadows moved along the walls, whispering her name. In her dreams, she saw Kale not as a vampire, but as a man bound by sorrow and love. His hands reached for her not to harm, but to protect. A fire burned behind his eyes, a longing that mirrored the ache in her own chest. When morning came, the castle was quiet, the world outside still veiled in mist. Alara wandered the halls, discovering rooms filled with treasures and artifacts of a time long past. Books lay open, filled with writings in languages she could not read. Paintings depicted figures with faces that seemed alive, eyes following her every move. She realized that Kale's life was not empty, though it had been lonely. It was filled with memories and burdens that spanned centuries. Kale found her in the library, standing before a large window overlooking the forest. The sunlight filtered through the mist, illuminating the clearing below. "Do you see now why I waited?" he asked, his voice low and reverent. Alara turned to him, her emotions tangled. "I do not understand everything. Why the curse? Why the waiting?" "Because love is never simple," he replied, "and because redemption takes time, even for those who live beyond mortal years. I have waited to see if you would survive, if you would be willing to embrace what destiny has chosen for us both." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She wanted to flee, yet her legs refused to move. She wanted to resist, yet something in Kale's gaze held her in place. A part of her, deep within, understood that this was no ordinary encounter. This was the crossing of two fates intertwined for a century, bound by magic and history, by sorrow and longing. Hours passed and she began to hear whispers in the castle, faint voices carried on the wind. She asked Kale about them and he only shook his head. "The castle remembers. It remembers every betrayal, every promise, every lost soul. Do not fear what it shows you, Alara. It is part of the truth you must learn." As night fell, the castle grew darker, shadows lengthening like fingers across the stone floors. Kale returned to her chamber, and for the first time he seemed uncertain. He knelt by the fireplace, his fingers tracing patterns in the cold ashes. "The bond we share is older than your family, older than the crown that rules this kingdom. You were never meant to walk this world alone, nor I. And yet you have been cast into danger, abandoned as all brides before you were abandoned." Alara's chest tightened. She had always feared being powerless, being alone. And now, facing this immortal being whose life had been shaped by sorrow and longing, she understood the weight of her own survival. She was no longer merely a victim of her family's cruelty. She was part of something vast, something dangerous, and something eternal. Suddenly, the castle doors slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Alara spun around, panic rising in her throat. Kale's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "You see," he murmured, "there is no turning back. Once you are here, you are part of this world, part of me." Her heart raced as the shadows deepened around her. She wanted to scream, yet her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to run, yet her body refused. All she could do was look into Kale's eyes, and in that instant she understood the truth. She was no longer alone, and her fate was no longer hers to choose. As the red moon rose over Eldrith, bathing the castle in an eerie light, Alara realized she had stepped into a story centuries in the making. A story of curses, of waiting, of love that could defy time. And at the edge of her fear and wonder, she felt something stir, a connection that neither of them fully understood, yet both had longed for in silence for 100 years. She did not yet know what awaited her, nor did she know if she would survive the trials of the vampire's world. But she knew one thing with certainty. Kale had waited a century just for her, and now she was here. The morning after the red moon had faded, the castle seemed quieter than usual, though the shadows still clung to every corner. Lady Alara had wandered the hallways for hours, her curiosity battling the fear that never fully left her. Each room she entered held objects of power, remnants of centuries, as if the castle itself was alive and remembering its past. Candles burned without flames, and paintings seemed to watch her every movement. Kale appeared suddenly, his presence startling her as though he had stepped from the shadows themselves. He moved with the grace of someone who had lived far longer than mortals should, his black coat brushing the floor. "You explore too freely," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "The castle is not without its dangers." "I must understand," Alara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "If I am here, then I must know what this place is and what you are." Kale's gaze softened, a rare warmth touching his sharp features. "Then you will learn, but the lessons are not easy. They require courage beyond what most mortals possess." He led her through a hidden door in the library, down a spiral staircase carved from black stone. The air grew colder with each step, carrying whispers that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Alara's heart beat faster, yet she did not falter. Kale's hand brushed hers briefly as they descended, a fleeting contact that sent a strange shiver through her. At the bottom, they entered a vast hall lined with mirrors. In each reflection, Alara saw not only herself but fleeting images of Kale as he had been centuries ago, young, human, yet haunted by sorrow. She stepped closer, her fingers grazing the cold glass. These are memories?" she asked. "Yes," Kale said. "The castle holds them all. Every choice I have made, every love I have lost, every betrayal I endured. I do not hide from the past, but it is heavy. It is the weight I have carried for a century." Alara's eyes softened. She had feared a monster, but what she saw was something else. A being trapped between darkness and longing, forced to endure solitude and regret for longer than she could imagine. "You are not just a vampire," she whispered. "You are lonely." Kale's eyes glimmered with a faint vulnerability. "Lonely is one word for it. Tortured is another. I waited for someone who could understand, who could survive me, and now you are here." The rest of the day passed with Kale guiding her through the castle's secrets. Alara learned to navigate hidden corridors and rooms filled with strange artifacts. She discovered a garden trapped under glass, its flowers frozen in eternal bloom, untouched by time. Birds of shadow perched among the twisted branches, singing songs that only she could hear. In the evenings, Kale tested her courage. They wandered the castle together, facing illusions and spirits that mirrored their deepest fears. One night, she confronted a phantom of her abandoned wedding, seeing her family's betrayal replayed in front of her. She trembled, but Kale's hand was steady on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her that she was no longer alone. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly. "The castle recognizes it, as do I. You may survive here in ways no one else could." Alara began to understand that the bond Kale spoke of was not only magical but emotional. He did not merely watch her, he observed her resilience, her courage, and her heart. The centuries had hardened him, but her presence seemed to stir something long buried, a faint spark of hope, of love, of redemption. Yet the castle was not without its dangers. Late one night, a distant scream echoed through the halls. Shadows twisted and danced along the walls, forming shapes too terrifying to name. Alara froze, but Kale moved with precision, intercepting the threat before it reached her. His movements were swift, precise, deadly yet controlled. "You are safe with me," he murmured, his voice a blend of command and promise. "But you must learn to trust me fully, or the castle will consume you." Trust was not easy. Alara had been betrayed by her own family, abandoned when she was most vulnerable. To rely on Kale, a being she barely understood, required faith she had never needed before. And yet, every small act of protection, every shared moment, built a fragile connection between them. Days turned into weeks. Alara explored the castle's forgotten library, reading old texts about the kingdom and the supernatural. She discovered a journal written by Kale centuries ago, recounting the story of the bride he had been promised but never claimed. Each page revealed his torment, his longing, and the curse that bound him to wait. He loved her, Alara whispered to herself one evening, holding the journal, and he has been waiting all this time. Kale appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. You understand now, he said, why I must see this through. You are the living continuation of a promise, the echo of a love that was denied. Her chest tightened. She could not yet answer his gaze with words, for the weight of his centuries pressed against her very soul. And what if I cannot be what you hope? She asked softly. Then you will survive anyway, he replied, his voice almost tender. But perhaps in the process we will both be transformed. Transformation came sooner than either of them expected. One night, as Alara wandered the corridors alone, she encountered the ghost of the witch who had cursed Kale centuries ago. The spirit's laughter echoed like glass breaking, and its eyes burned with malice. You think you can claim him, the witch hissed. You cannot survive what I have created, Alara's heart raced. She wanted to run, yet something inside her rose, a courage she had never known. I will not be afraid, she said firmly. I will not let your curse control my fate. The witch's laughter faded, leaving only the cold stillness of the castle. Alara realized that Kale's struggles were not entirely his own. They were entangled with every mortal and immortal who had crossed paths with him. Her presence had awakened more than his hope. It had stirred forces that had lain dormant for centuries. When she returned to Kale, she found him waiting by the window, looking out over the endless forest. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a shadow of worry she had never seen. They are stirring, he said quietly. The curse, the witch, it is not gone. You may have survived until now, but greater trials are ahead. Alara stepped closer. Then we face them together, she said. Her voice trembled slightly, yet held determination. I am not leaving. Kale turned to her, his eyes softening for a brief moment. He studied her as if memorizing every detail, the way her hair fell across her face, the strength in her stance, the courage in her gaze. You are brave, he murmured. Perhaps braver than I am after a century of waiting. The bond between them deepened. Alara began to sense not only Kale's power but his pain and longing. She realized that beneath his fearsome exterior, he was a being capable of love, capable of sacrifice. And she felt herself drawn to him, not just out of necessity but out of understanding, sympathy, and a strange, unspoken connection. Their nights became a mix of training, exploration, and conversation. Kale taught her about the castle's magic, about the spirits that lingered, about the hidden dangers that could strike without warning. In return, she shared stories of the mortal world, of kindness and cruelty, of love and betrayal. Yet even as they grew closer, the threat of the witch loomed. One evening, as the storm raged outside, the shadows coalesced in the hall, forming shapes that moved with intent. Alara stood beside Kale, ready to face them, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. You are ready, Kale said, placing a hand over hers. Do not falter now. Courage is what will keep you alive and what will save us both. The shadows surged forward, and Alara felt a wave of fear wash over her. But as she glanced at Kale, she saw something that steadied her, a mixture of trust, longing, and unwavering determination. Together they faced the darkness, side by side. The castle trembled under the storm, its walls echoing with the witch's laughter. Lady Alara stood beside Kale, gripping his hand as the shadows twisted around them. The air was thick with magic, old and dangerous, and she could feel the weight of centuries pressing on every stone. The witch's curse had awakened fully, seeking to test them both, and there was no turning back. You are both mine, the witch's voice echoed through the halls, sharp and cold. No love, no courage, no bond can save you now. Alara's heart raced, but she drew strength from Kale's presence. He was tall, unyielding, his eyes glowing with centuries of sorrow and determination. Though he had been alone for 100 years, he was no longer a solitary force. She was by his side, and together they had faced more than mortal fear could endure. Kale's voice was calm, almost tender as he spoke to her. "Alara, you must trust me completely. The bond we share, it is stronger than this curse. It has endured time, solitude, and pain. It will endure this." Alara nodded, fear and determination mingling in her chest. "I trust you, Kale. We face it together." The shadows surged forward, taking forms that mimicked their deepest fears. Alara saw her family's faces twisted in anger and betrayal, their voices screaming in accusation. She felt the sting of abandonment, the ache of being left alone to face the world. Kale moved in front of her, his presence a shield against the illusions. "Do not let them control you," Kale commanded, his voice both firm and gentle. "Your strength comes from within and from what we share." Alara drew a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand around hers. She imagined the years of loneliness he had endured, the centuries of waiting for a love he could not claim, until now. With that thought, she felt courage surge through her veins. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if sensing her defiance. Kale's eyes glowed brighter and he whispered, "Together, Alara, our bond is our weapon." They moved through the hall as one, Kale's movements fluid and precise, hers guided by trust and instinct. The shadows twisted and struck, but each attack was met with resistance, a force greater than the witch had anticipated. The air crackled with magic, the castle itself responding to the strength of their connection. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the center of the hall, the witch herself, her form ethereal and menacing. Her eyes burned with fury as she raised her hands, drawing power from the very stones of the castle. "You dare defy me," she hissed. "Your bond is fragile, mortal. And you, Kale, will taste the bitterness of despair once more." Kale stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "No, we are not fragile. We are bound by something older than your curse, something you cannot touch. We are stronger than fear and hatred." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest, the courage of centuries and the bond between them strengthening every fiber of her being. She reached out, placing her hand over Kale's, and together they focused on the connection that had been growing since her arrival. The witch recoiled, the shadows quivering as their combined presence pushed against her power. "Impossible!" she screamed. "No mortal can endure, no vampire can resist." But Alara did not falter. She met Kale's gaze, and in that moment, every fear, every doubt, every lingering pain melted away. They were not merely fighting a curse. They were fighting for their shared destiny, for the possibility of a life together beyond the centuries of suffering. A surge of light and warmth erupted from their joined hands, spreading through the hall, touching every shadow, every corner of the castle. The witch shrieked, her form disintegrating into mist as her power unraveled. The shadows dissolved, leaving only silence and the soft glow of the castle's candles. Kale lowered his hand, and for the first time in a century, he allowed himself to breathe fully. His eyes softened as he looked at Alara, a mixture of relief, awe, and something more profound, love unspoken but undeniable. "You did it," he said quietly. "You helped me break the curse, helped me reclaim what was lost for 100 years." Alara smiled, though tears threatened to spill. "We did it together. I didn't know I had this strength, but with you I found it." Kale stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You are braver than any mortal I have ever known. And more than that, you are the one I have waited for. A century of longing ends with you." Alara's heart quickened. The bond between them was no longer merely destiny. It was real, alive, and powerful. She realized that the fear she had carried for so long was gone, replaced by trust, hope, and a deep connection that defied time. They walked together through the halls of the castle, now quiet and peaceful. The mist had lifted, and sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the stone floors and the treasures that had once seemed so threatening. The castle, once a prison, now felt like a home, an eternal sanctuary shaped by their courage and shared strength. Days passed, and Alara learned more about Kale's world. She discovered the beauty within the darkness. The frozen garden now glimmered with soft light. The library's enchanted books revealed histories and stories long forgotten, and the spirits that lingered were no longer threats but witnesses to their bond. Kale, too, began to change. The weight of centuries lifted slightly from his shoulders, replaced by a quiet joy he had not known for decades. He shared stories of the mortal world, of love, of loss, and of the things he had once cherished. And Alara, in turn, shared her own experiences, weaving the threads of her life into a tapestry that intertwined with his. Yet even as peace settled over the castle, they knew that the world outside still waited. The kingdom of Eldrith would not forget her disappearance, and whispers of the vampire lord's return would spread beyond the forest. But inside these ancient walls, they had found something no one could take: trust, understanding, and a love forged in shadows and trials. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep violet, Kale led Alara to the highest tower of the castle. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of the forest and the promise of eternity. He turned to her, his gaze intense yet tender. "Alara," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "A century is long, but eternity is longer. I cannot promise what will come beyond these walls, but I can promise you this: whatever the future holds, we face it together. You are mine as I am yours." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had feared the darkness, feared being powerless, feared being abandoned. But now she understood that love was not only about safety, it was about trust, courage, and the willingness to face the unknown together. "I am yours," she whispered, "and you are mine. Whatever comes, we will endure it together." Kale reached for her hand, entwining their fingers. For a moment the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the castle, the wind, the faint glow of candlelight, and the bond between them, a bond that had survived centuries of waiting, curses, and fear. As night fell over Eldrith, the stars shimmered above, and the castle stood as a silent witness to their union of hearts. For the first time in 100 years, Kale smiled, not with the caution of centuries, but with the warmth of someone who had finally found what he had been seeking. Ilara rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, or the rhythm of the centuries within him. They had survived the darkness, broken the curse, and discovered something eternal, a love that could endure beyond time itself. The storm had passed. The shadows were gone, and in their place a future awaited, uncertain, perhaps dangerous but full of possibility, a future that they would face together.